Hey, it's producer Mark at KCMO Talk Radio, and if you're an NFL or college football fan, check out my weekly sports betting podcasts. Search College Pick'em Program or Sunday Sharps wherever you get your podcasts, and hit that subscribe button for my weekly picks, including the Chiefs, Mizzou, Kansas, and K-State. Now, here's the Monday in the Morning podcast.
Well, how are you feeling on a Monday, day before Election Day? Welcome in on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. We are always streaming all morning long, all week long, every single day on the KCMO Talk Radio app. So I am feeling okay, but I felt better 8 days ago. I put this up on Facebook and X yesterday that, for what it was worth, I felt better about Donald Trump's chances last Sunday morning than I do today. I don't feel bad about his chances, but I just get this weird feeling that the Democratic machine that has a very impressive, incredibly well-funded and coordinated ground game, combined with the fact that their voters are at this point more high-propensity voters than Donald Trump's, many of the people in the suburbs who have swung districts and swung states away from the Republican Party are going to show up and have shown up in force. Now, you can be very optimistic and you can say, well, look at the early voting numbers. Republicans have made major inroads in closing the gap in the early vote. And that's absolutely true. They're still trailing, but they've closed the gap. The question is, and what nobody really knows, is are these individuals who are just moving their vote from Election Day to early voting, or are these ultimately new voters who are going to make a difference in this election coming up tomorrow? There's really no way of knowing that right now. It's all speculation. And then, of course, you look at just the last week. Donald Trump is barnstorming the country. I'm looking at a line right now as folks wait to get into his rally in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm saying to myself, okay, I mean, that's great. You have incredible enthusiasm. You have people who are out there for Donald Trump. But you also have somebody who is, some may argue, making the election more about him than her down the stretch. So I didn't catch every Trump rally over the weekend, but I caught bits and pieces where I could of some of his closing arguments. And yeah, he was up there doing the usual Donald Trump stuff. But the biggest thing that we have got to hammer home on, and the thing that should be used more than anything over the next 36 hours in this election cycle, is that jobs report from Friday. Now, I said on Friday that I didn't think it was going to move the needle either way a whole lot because people feel how they do about this economy, right? You can't really change how people feel about the economy either way based on one jobs report that drops the Friday before Election Day. But that jobs report on Friday was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. 12,000 jobs created when the expectations were for over 100,000. And then you heard all the excuse making. Well, you know, there was a hurricane and there was a Boeing strike. Well, guess what, guys? Those who project how many jobs are going to be created, they knew there was a hurricane last month. They knew there was a Boeing strike, and they still projected 100,000 jobs, and instead you got 12,000, and the bulk of the gains came from where? The bulk of the gains came from the government or government-adjacent industries. So that's all. I mean, that is literally the thing that if I'm Donald Trump, I am hammering home on over the weekend. And on top of the fact that when you look at who's getting jobs in this country, when you compare them, it's really amazing. Over the last year, native-born Americans have lost almost 800,000 jobs, while foreign-born workers have gained over 1 million jobs. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, the U.S. labor market's turning into a temp agency for foreign workers and government bureaucrats. That's what it feels like right now. It's unbelievable. Native-born American workers have fewer jobs today than before the pandemic, 873,000 fewer, while all the net job growth has gone to foreign-born workers at 3.7 million. The reason that many Americans aren't really happy with the economy is because they're not the ones who are getting the jobs. So Trump has to just hammer home on this. He did some of that over the weekend.
Meanwhile, 100% of the net jobs created, you've heard this, it's an amazing thing. They've all gone, 100% have gone to migrants. Did you know that? All the jobs that were created. These are depression-type numbers, and that's where we're heading if she's elected. You know.
So that was Donald Trump over the weekend at one of his many rallies he was doing. So I'm watching this, and overall, I'm saying, okay, get right to it, hammer that point home. That's got to be the closing argument. The closing argument can't really be Donald Trump the man, because that drives just as many people out to vote against him as it does for him. It's got to be, listen, you don't have to love me. You don't have to like me. What you have to do is realize that this economy is not working for a large percentage of the American people. And the reason it's not working is because of the people who are currently in charge of the federal government. That's it. That's the closing argument. It's not about me. It's about you. And there are times when, of course, Donald Trump can't necessarily help himself. The media, of course, is trying to find everything they can to make Donald Trump out to be the worst human being on the planet. They've done that for a decade. They will continue to do it. And I'm not here to say otherwise. I'm not here to say that, he's a choir boy. We all know he's not. But the reality is this. The reality is that Donald Trump has and did run the country effectively, and the policies largely worked. And Nikki Haley dropping a piece this morning, people wondering where Nikki Haley's been. She wrote a big piece that is featured this morning in the Wall Street Journal. She shared it last night. I agree with Mr. Trump that America should be strong, far stronger than we are today. When he was president, Russia didn't invade another country. Iran was back on its heels. China received serious pushback for the first time in decades, and our southern border was more secure. The world is unsafe under Biden-Harris, and we shouldn't expect that to change under a Harris administration. These are enormous policy differences that will affect the lives of every American in much of the world. Nikki Haley adds here, will Mr. Trump do some things I don't like in a second term? I'm sure he will. If that was the question before voters, then I imagine Mr. Trump would lose. But that is not the question in any election. No politician gets everything right. For those of us clear-eyed enough to see Mr. Trump's flaws and honest enough to acknowledge them, the question is whether we're better off with his policies or his opponents' policies. On taxes, spending, inflation, immigration, energy, and national security, the candidates are miles apart, and Mr. Trump is clearly the better choice. That is from Nikki Haley.
She's a real beauty.
And if Nikki Haley would be willing to do it, I would drag her out on the campaign trail. Donald Trump's not going to win suburban women. He's not. But like anything else, if you keep the gap close enough that you can make it up with other demographics, that's how you get yourself a victory. So maybe she doesn't want to do it. Maybe she's not all that interested. But she is a voice that would move maybe a couple of undecided people. And down the home stretch of this election, that's got to be what Donald Trump wants to achieve and accomplish right now as we sit here on election eve. So maybe you're feeling differently, but I don't know. I have this weird feeling, and maybe it's also because, listen, whether it was 22 and, the big red wave's coming, well, that never happened. 2020, okay, Trump exceeded the poll expectations by a mile, but still came up just short. And then even 2018, obviously, was not a great midterm. So we're sitting here the day before wondering what tomorrow looks like. And while there are reasons to be optimistic, there are also reasons to pump the brakes and say, maybe not. Next on KCMO, there was a poll that totally shocked the entire political news cycle yesterday. And it was right in our backyard. Yeah, right up the road here from the Kansas City area. We'll share that with you and tell you why I'm just not buying it Next on 95.7 FM KCMO. Well, this shocked the world yesterday. This Des Moines Register poll up to our north for the state of Iowa has Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump in the state of Iowa the weekend before Election Day. I bleep you not. Now, do I believe that Donald Trump is going to lose Iowa? No. No, I don't. But it didn't stop the Des Moines Register from putting out a poll that had Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump among likely voters 47 to 44. And it comes from someone who is considered a very reputable pollster, Ann Selzer. She is considered the gold standard, especially up there in Iowa for these Iowa polls. So this is something that is getting a lot of attention on the Democratic side of the aisle. They look at the poll that dropped in Kansas last week from Fort Hays State that showed Kamala Harris trailing Donald Trump by just 5 points here in Kansas. And then this poll comes out just to our north in Iowa, showing Kamala Harris leading in Iowa. Now, do I sit here and think that Kamala Harris is just outside the margin of error in Kansas and is leading Donald Trump in Iowa? No, not in a million years. But here's part of what I think is going on, and this is just human nature. People want to root for a winner. People want to vote for a winner. Front running is a real thing. We know it as well as anybody here in Kansas City. You can go around the country now and you can see Chiefs gear, Chiefs hats, and Chiefs jerseys on people who could not point Kansas City out on a map as recently as 5 years ago. It's human nature. It's the instincts that we all have. And I was talking to somebody on Friday who is actually working with the Donald Trump team in some of the key swing states. And that's what he told me. He said, listen, down the stretch, people want to go vote for the perceived winner. That's human nature. So putting out a strong front as if you are in the lead is something that both campaigns typically do down the stretch, because they want to get their people out and they want to make it seem like, hey, you want to be a part of the winning team, so to speak. So that's exactly what they're doing. Do I think that was the intent of this pollster? I can't assume what their motivation was. I'm not going to assume what their motivation was. But without going too far into the weeds, here's why I'm not buying it. When you look at who they polled, and that's always what matters, right? Who you end up polling. Well, let me give you a great example here. Who they ended up polling and what the exit poll results were back in 2020 in the state of Iowa compared to what this poll showed over the weekend. So in 2020, the exit polling showed that senior women were D+6. That means that senior women voted for Joe Biden 6 points more than Donald Trump. In this specific poll that got released by the Des Moines Register, it had Democrats, senior women Democrats, plus 35. Plus 35 for senior women in the state of Iowa in this poll. How about senior men? In 2020, in the exit polls, it had Republicans plus 32 in the state of Iowa for senior men. This poll over the weekend from the Des Moines Register had Republicans plus 2 among senior men. That's a 30-point swing from the 2020 exit poll on where senior men were 4 years ago compared to where they are today. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And that's why I'm not buying the poll, but the media was going nuts on this thing yesterday, loving it. I mean, they were like, oh my goodness, we are in the mix in Iowa. Look at us up here. It's like, no, you're not. You're just not in the mix in Iowa. And then there was also this New York Times poll that the final New York Times Siena College battleground poll showed that this thing was also neck and neck in a lot of the swing states. It had Trump up 4 over Harris in Arizona, Harris up 1 over Trump in Georgia. They're tied at 47 in Michigan. Harris up 2 in North Carolina, which I don't believe. Nevada, Harris up 3 over Trump. Pennsylvania, tied at 50. and Wisconsin, Harris up 2 over Donald Trump. But here's the flaw in the New York Times poll. And the New York Times pollster, Nate Cohn, actually wrote about this in the polling that was released yesterday. He writes here, 4 years ago, the polls were thought to underestimate Donald Trump because of non-response bias, in which his supporters were less likely to take surveys than demographically similar Biden supporters. It's hard to measure non-response bias. After all, we couldn't reach these demographically similar voters. But one measure I track from time to time is the proportion of Democrats or Republicans who respond to a survey. The New York Times adds here, across these final polls, white Democrats were 16% likelier to respond than white Republicans. That's a larger disparity than our earlier polls this year. And it's not much better than our final polls in 2020, even with the pandemic long over. It raises yet the possibility that the polls could underestimate Donald Trump yet again. And the polling miss was by several points in some of the key swing states. I mean, Biden was leading Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, some of these key swing states by 5, 6, 7 points in the final polling. And we know how close those races ended up being. So the New York Times is like putting in this caveat as if to say, yeah, we could be just as wrong as we were 4 years ago. And if that does happen, then it's a Donald Trump blowout the other way. But I can't sit here and predict that right now. I just can't. And nobody in their right mind should be. Paul's in Kansas City on a Monday. What's up, Paul? You're on KCMO.
Hey, Pete, I agree with you this morning. First, they sent J.D. Vance up to New Hampshire. They say New Jersey's in play. He stops in Virginia. I think that's just gamemanship on both sides. So I agree with you. Iowa's not in play. Kansas not in play. But I do agree with you. I'm real nervous about this because people are going to ask themselves, are you willing to accept 8 years of Harris? Because once she's in, you're not going to beat her on her reelection. So I think the economy is going to be, are you willing to take high car insurance, high food prices? That's what's going to do it. But I'm with you, Pete. I'm real nervous about this. I'm not buying this. It's going to be close.
I think it's going to be close, Paul, but we're also in this weird environment where it could easily be a blowout either way. And that's what's strange. Like, everyone's sitting here predicting it's going to be close. And a part of me feels like the experts are doing that to cover their rear ends, right? Because nobody wants to be like, yeah, Trump's going to roll the 300 some odd electoral votes or vice versa, and then the opposite happens. Because you could have that happen on either side. It only takes a handful of votes moving in some of these swing states for one of these two candidates to blow the other one out. And anybody who is super confident right now, I don't think should be. Because we are in, obviously, a coin flip environment just as a country, and it will come down to, in large part, who ends up showing up tomorrow to close that gap. Coming up on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. The final pitch from one side of the aisle. Are you buying it? We'll get to it next. I guess the sales staff here at KCMO will have to get back to work after the election comes and goes, huh? Can't just keep relying on all the different political ads that are running all over the place. So I know we may not have the closest, most exciting races here locally this cycle. There's nothing statewide in Kansas. Missouri is likely to go all Republican at every statewide race. But there are local things that are going to be worth watching, like the Johnson County Commission. How does that turn out? The Kansas legislature, due to the Republicans, hang on to their supermajority. And then also, on the other side, you've got the amendments, sports betting, you've got the abortion amendment, ranked choice voting, a lot of different things on the Missouri side on that front that are going to be closer than what we expect to see when it comes to individuals on the ballot statewide tomorrow. And we'll have, of course, the full breakdown for you here on KCMO on Wednesday morning. Tomorrow night, we will air Fox News Radio's coverage starting at 7 p.m., run that until midnight. I will be with our friends over at KCTV5 for their election night coverage. So what is the closing argument from Kamala Harris? Well, it's that Donald Trump pushes violent rhetoric. It's not about her. It's not about policies. It is about Orange Man bad. And that's what you heard a lot of over the weekend from the sitting VP who wants to be the next president of the United States.
And then, even worse, he has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party.
Oh, it's exhausting. Now, what did Donald Trump say about Liz Cheney late last week? He called her a war hawk. He said that she is somebody, and I have the audio here. He said that Liz Cheney is one of these people who will sit in Washington, D.C. and decide to send thousands of troops into some war zone while they are in the cozy confines of the Beltway. Here's what he said.
But his daughter's a very dumb individual, very dumb. She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy.
If you don't hear that clip in its full context and be like, oh, yeah, I mean, that was just Donald Trump using a Donald Trump analogy to rip an opponent and clearly not talk about having them killed, then you have a really severe case of Trump derangement syndrome. And you don't even have to take my word for it. There are left-wing outlets like Snopes. You've heard of Snopes, right? They are fact checkers. I use that term very loosely. And even they wrote over the weekend, despite violent rhetoric, Donald Trump did not threaten to have Liz Cheney shot. Because you can hear it there in the clip. What Trump was saying late last week was, hey, Liz Cheney is not going to be the one who's going to face the fire literally and is somebody who is not willing to do that. So why would we put her in charge and let her be one of those people who is willing to send our children to war? That used to be a concept that a lot of Democrats actually agreed with. When they would blast the neocons who used to run the Republican Party, they would use that line. And they would say exactly that. They would say, hey, you're not sending your kids. You're not putting yourself in that situation. So why are you going to willy-nilly just be like, all right, thousands of troops, send them to Iraq, send them to anywhere?
You know, they looked in the mirror and they recognized it. How would you like it if?
Yeah.
Thing. Then Trump just used that same deal on him.
He used it right back on him.
Yeah.
That's
put
what he
you
did.
In that position.
Yeah, put yourself in that position. Liz Cheney is not going to be that person. It's amazing how you can see the party shifting in front of our eyes over the last few years. The Democrats have embraced the Cheneys, who they despised 20 years ago. And I will add, in part, they weren't necessarily wrong about Dick Cheney, who, yeah, the guy was a warmonger. And he had a lot of people with a lot of power in Washington, D.C. and in his inner circle who felt that way. Right? But now they sit there and they're like, well, no, Liz Cheney's a great patriot. According to who? Why? Because she hates Donald Trump? Like, what makes her a great patriot outside of the fact that she despises Donald Trump? And even a lot of writers on the left were pushing back on this the last couple of days. Zach Beauchamp is a guy who writes for Vox online publication. And he wrote here on Saturday, folks, Donald Trump did not threaten to execute Liz Cheney. He actually was calling her a chicken hawk, something liberals have said about her for ages. Look at the context. Trump is talking about giving her a weapon. Typically, people put in front of firing squads aren't armed. Yeah, that's a very good point. They're usually not armed. So now What you have, though, is a closing argument from Kamala Harris that Donald Trump is pushing violent rhetoric. Now, is Trump the smoothest when it comes to making his point? No, he's not. He can sure be clunky at times. I will not dispute that for a second. But the broad point that was being made here by Donald Trump late last week that just became this infatuation of the media Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was actually one that they used to agree with, and they used to use the same argument, albeit maybe not as direct, when talking about many Republicans, like those during the Bush years. Trump turns it on them, and now they're big defenders of Liz Cheney, Kamala Harris, and what I would argue is now the party of war. You tell me when you listen to these two candidates and you look at the track record of these two candidates as well, who's more likely to put us in a position where we are not spending money overseas and where we are less likely to be sending troops overseas? Nikki Haley wrote about it in her Wall Street Journal piece, and actually a lot of people would call Nikki Haley kind of a throwback to that neocon era of the Republican Party. She wrote here in the Wall Street Journal, when Donald Trump was president, Russia didn't invade another country. Iran was back on its heels. China received serious pushback. China received serious pushback for the first time in decades, and our southern border was more secure. The world is unsafe under Biden-Harris, and we should not expect that to change under a Harris administration. That is the case that Nikki Haley laid out in the Wall Street Journal this morning, right? So it's unbelievable when you actually put it into that perspective and how the two parties viewed someone like Liz Cheney, the Cheney family, the Cheney record, as recently as 7, 8, 9 years ago, compared to where we find ourselves today. And when your closing argument is Donald Trump is pushing violent rhetoric, when you're Kamala Harris, that tells me that all you're trying to do is just drive out your base. Drive out your base out of fear and nothing more than that. 913-408-7957. It's 6:43 on a Monday, day before Election Day here on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Streaming all morning long. Make sure you're listening on that stream as you get your morning started on the KCMO Talk Radio app, the iHeart app, or the TuneIn app. So I saw some fake outrage from Republicans over the weekend because Kamala Harris was on Saturday Night Live. And I'm like, guys, what are you actually upset about here? You should be totally fine with this. And I'll explain why and play some of the cringe for you next to wrap up the 6 o'clock hour on KCMO. Oh, please spare me. Spare me the fake outrage some people have over Kamala Harris being on Saturday Night Live. This is a gift. All right, this is a positive development for Donald Trump and his campaign. That SNL and Kamala Harris's team came together the weekend before the election and decided to have her on the show. Okay, there's not a single vote that got moved because Kamala Harris was on this program. And in fact, you don't really have a lot of complaining going on from the Trump campaign. It's just so-called the, I think, outrage class on social media who is like, oh my gosh, Kamala, where's Trump's equal time? Please, would you really even want Trump to go on SNL? Like, yeah, he's funnier than her. There's no doubt about it. It's not even all that close. But I'm not hearing the Trump team being like, we demand our chance on Saturday Night Live. Like, I don't hear that. In fact, all the campaign has said, and this is from the official spokesman, Stephen Chung, that the Harris appearance on SNL was a sign of desperation to appeal to voters as her campaign spirals down the drain into obscurity. That was the official quote from the Trump campaign. They're not like, oh, yeah, we wish we got on SNL. So why are some of you upset about it? It does not move the needle. Who cares? And it was cringy as could be anyway, John.
Yeah, until the FCC commissioner came out and said, hey, this may violate.
Well, yes, the FCC, so one of the FCC commissioners did come out, Brendan Carr, and he was appointed by Trump, and he said this is a clear and blatant effort to evade the FCC's equal time rule. He writes here, The purpose of the rule is to avoid exactly this type of bias and partisan conduct, a licensed broadcaster using the public airwaves to exert its influence for one candidate on the eve of an election. Unless the broadcaster offers equal time to other qualifying campaigns, he believes the equal time rule was violated. Now, there's always exceptions to that, right? Like, we're an exception to that. Newscasts, documentaries, political debates. It's a gray area. This stuff is a gray area. I think you can make a case on either side as to whether or not this violates equal time.
Yeah. I feel like Saturday Night Live's an opinion show.
Well, that's
almost since its inception.
That's
where
what
the
I feel.
Politics are going on the skits.
We all know what they're about, right? I view them the same as almost a news show in many cases because we know what the bias is going to be, and most people understand what the SNL bias is going to be. And then if you're Donald Trump's campaign and you watch the cold open of Kamala Harris and Maya Rudolph talking to each other as if they're both Kamala Harris, you tell me who's getting moved by this cringeworthy comedy that is going to make you spit your coffee out for all the wrong reasons before 7 o'clock this morning.
You and me both, sister. Nice to see you, Kamala. It is nice to see you, Kamala. And I'm just here to remind you, you got this. Because you can do something your opponent cannot do. You can open doors. I see what you did there, like to a garbage truck, right? I don't really laugh like that, do I? Bit. Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos and end the drama with a cool new stepmamala.
Oh, my God.
Kick back in our pajamas and watch a rom Kamala. Like Legally Blondula. And start decorating for Christmas. Fa la 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 la. Because what do we always say? Keep Kamala and carry on a la. We know each other so well, we even finish each other's belief in the promise of America. Exactly. Now come on, let's bring it in. I gotta tell myself something over here. Come here. I'm going to vote for us. Great. Any chance you are registered in Pennsylvania? Nope, I am not. Well, it was worth a shot. And live from New York
If you're a Donald Trump supporter and you're upset that that happened, then I can't help you. There is nobody who was like, I wasn't sure about Kamala, but man, she knocked it out of the park with that cringeworthy, super inauthentic cold open for SNL. There was not a point during that when I was laughing. Now, Mark, you were laughing in there. And were you laughing because it was painfully uncomfortable and awkward, or did you find it funny?
The whole drama, like just rhyming your name, like I don't get it. It just made me laugh because it's so weird.
Okay, all right. Because if you actually found it funny, I would have to relieve you of your duties on the show. I just wanted to make sure it was really, you were laughing almost out of uncomfortable awkwardness is what it seemed. But since I'm on the other side of the glass, I couldn't tell why exactly you were laughing. So I just wanted to clarify that before the show went on any further. But I appreciate you clarifying it the way you did. That is not something that the Trump campaign should be upset about. And sure, if you want to say, well, Lorne Michaels said he wasn't going to have either candidate on, and then they fly in Kamala the weekend before. Okay, so Kamala was not doing something in a swing state to do an awkward SNL skit that really is watched by just super progressive, uber liberal people who are likely going to vote for her anyway. Wow, congratulations. You actually got her out of a swing state to go to New York.
There's 120 people in the audience.
Yeah, the good point. And they were just eating it up, apparently. Yeah. I mean, I'd have to take a few shots before I go to see that show. If that was me going into SNL, wait, you're getting who?
I imagine that's what happens.
I got to imagine. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to pregame that real hard to have a good time. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Make it look like Arrowhead Stadium outside of the SNL HQ there in Midtown New York. It's not a big deal. The Trump campaign is not making it out to be a big deal. The equal time rules are sketchy as is in today's environment. And if you think SNL is moving the needle, you're giving them way too much credit. You can't say the legacy media is shot and more irrelevant by the day, and then at the same time be like, but SNL had Kamala on. You can't have it both ways. If Kamala wins tomorrow, I can promise you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it will not be because of the awkward cold open that you just heard on SNL. I'm not predicting this, but there is a world where Donald Trump wins the popular vote, but loses the Electoral College. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, well, no, that's not how it goes. I mean, Republicans have not won the popular vote since 2004, and they're not the favorites to necessarily do it tomorrow. But if he wins the popular vote, how could he possibly lose the Electoral College? Well, if he closes the gap in some of the big blue states, but still loses, right? Like if he closes the gap in places like California, and I'm not saying he's going to come close to winning California, there's no chance. But because those states are so populated, if Donald Trump, let's say, loses California 58 to, I don't know, 58 to 40, and then you got a couple of points of, let's say, third-party voters, you're moving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of votes. I had somebody tell me that they think he could lose New Jersey by only 3, 4, 5 points. That was a Biden plus 16 state a couple of years ago. He might come closer in places like Virginia that have typically gone blue and are pretty big states. New York might see a big swing to Donald Trump. He won't win New York, but even if it's within, 7, 8, 9 points, that's closer than it's been in a very long time. But it doesn't matter because all the electoral votes obviously still go to Kamala Harris. So, doing a bit better in some of the big blue states may help him get to the point where the popular vote could move in his favor. Because if you go back, forget 2020 because you had all the mail-in stuff, right? But you go back to 2016, Trump beat Hillary Clinton, but he lost the popular vote 48% to 46%, and she got 66 million votes, and he got 63 million votes. So that's probably a better comparison than 2020 when Joe Biden got 81 million, he got 74. So if Trump's only 3 million votes off of Hillary Clinton, and some of the big blue states maybe get an enthusiasm of Trump voters, enthusiasm to get out there and support their guy, even if they know he's not going to win. And Democrats in these big blue states know that they don't really have to go out and vote because their state's locked up. That may be enough to close the gap in some of these states where it doesn't change the way the state generally votes, but it could move enough votes to make the popular vote in play. But then, if you still end up losing the blue wall states, all three of them, by razor-thin margins, there is a world where Trump wins the popular vote and loses the Electoral College. I'm in no way sitting here predicting it. I don't believe that's going to be the case. And some of you asking for an official prediction, I'll give you that tomorrow morning here on the show. Bill O'Reilly jumped the gun on me here. Bill gave it on Monday. And I'm like, Bill, you're making me look bad. What's going on? Why are you doing that? Come on, brother. But I'll give you one tomorrow. So when I look at it, I say to myself, okay, well, while it's not likely, it is something that should at least be watched. And you should at least look at and consider the possibility that that could happen. Now, in the meantime, as we look at where things are going here down the home stretch, our old friend Claire McCaskill showed up on MSNBC over the weekend. And she is not happy with Elon Musk supporting Donald Trump. Now, I don't know about you, and I know my memory may not be the best waking up every day at 4 a.m. the last bunch of years, but I don't remember Claire McCaskill being super upset about Mark Zuckerberg showing his love for Joe Biden 4 years ago. I don't remember her at any point in the last couple of weeks getting really upset by all of Hollywood lining up for Kamala Harris. Have you seen the roster of Kamala Harris celebrity endorsements? My goodness, it looks like the VIP list at a Diddy party. It's quite impressive. But Claire McCaskill was not happy with Elon Musk on MSNBC yesterday and said this.
This group of mega donors, bigger donors than we ever have seen, the likes of Elon Musk, who's campaigning more and harder than any business person, who might end up with an official or unofficial role in a Donald Trump administration. What do you think about all this, and what are people telling you?
Well, I think it's really scary territory. We have some billionaires in this country, and if you look at the top 10 donors to Donald Trump, they've given over $1 billion to him.
Just the top 5.
Yeah, I mean, and that was not counting how much more Musk has spent. Musk is in Pennsylvania. He thinks because he can do rockets and electric cars that he can figure out how to get people to vote. But he's got a hard assignment because the people he's trying to get to vote are low propensity voters. They're people that don't vote all the time. In fact, this bro thing that they've done, let's get the young men. Well, the reason they're bros is because they don't care about voting.
Yeah, if you're not living in your basement, you're not going to vote.
Yeah, they're really hard to get to the voting place.
The bros. Claire McCaskill, not happy with the bros. She's still not happy.
She knows all about it, doesn't she?
I know. She's not happy with the bros here in Missouri after they booted her out of office 6 years ago now. So now she mostly complains about the bros on MSNBC.
She down on the demo.
Yep, she's very, very down on the demo of bros. All these years later. So now she goes on MSNBC and uses it as a personal therapy session. Now, there's no doubt Elon Musk, we know, is supporting Donald Trump. He has a PAC that is supporting Donald Trump. But the notion that Democrats are going to go out there and be like, oh my gosh, rich people are supporting the other side, when it is well known and it has been well documented that the wealthier people have long endorsed, especially since Donald Trump came into the political cycle, have long endorsed and supported the Democratic Party, is comical. In fact, according to a breakdown by Forbes, remember, they don't like these little pesky things called facts. According to Forbes, Kamala Harris has gotten more of the country's billionaires backing. 83 billionaires support Kamala Harris, compared to 52 billionaires who support Donald Trump. Boy, that's something that's really inconvenient for Claire McCaskill, who gets to go on MSNBC and just complain about Elon Musk and complain about the bros and bro culture. It must be nice to do that and let MSNBC let you get away with it without asking you what exactly the numbers might be. But Forbes did the full breakdown, and you've got 60% more billionaires supporting Kamala Harris than are supporting Donald Trump. There's no doubt there's big money on both sides, and the PAC system remains a flawed system that does benefit the uber wealthy and their agenda versus the working person. But it's not even close when you look at where the big money donors are in this election cycle. Same thing as 4 years ago. And they're not on Donald Trump's side. And they really haven't been on Donald Trump's side for the most part since he got into the political arena. And the hope for Claire McCaskill and so many like her are that the work that Donald Trump and Elon Musk with his PAC have put into that low propensity male voter is not going to pan out come tomorrow. That is a big risk, right? They have gone after that young male, that 18 to 35-year-old male voter, going on podcasts, targeting them with different ads and things like that. But if that guy doesn't show up, and it's a big risk that they're taking targeting that young male, if that young male doesn't show up, then the Trump campaign and Donald Trump will end up coming up short tomorrow night.